coding. So today's session, we are going to focus on the PHP, which is known as dynamic programming language, which we want to create dynamic websites or dynamic applications. We can use PHP. So PHP documents usually ends with the extension of .php, and usually we will use a web server whenever web server handles the extraction. So it will automatically passes through the what we call PHP preprocessor. Now, when we want to use a PHP program, it use a file which will display in the user's browser. And usually, although we written the code in using PHP, the output will be only a HTML. So the usually we will have open and close tags, and you will see open tag start with the angular bracket, question mark, and PHP. And the close tag, we start with the question mark, and then again we have a angle bracket. So in between, we can have PHP commands. So if you look at the whole the process of the dynamic interaction between the client and server response sequence. So usually when we want to process a page, we usually start typing the web address on the browser, and then browser will look up the IP address. Usually we will have a DNS, and then once you get the IP, then you are going to request the main page. So that main page request served by the web server, and it will receive the request, and then according to the request, it will get the required file from the drive. And then let's assume that you have some PHP coding. So whenever you have PHP coding, so then you need to process the PHP, and usually while the processing, if you have, let's say we have some database access, which you need to execute SQL statement in MySQL. For example, it could be some embedded SQL statement which execute the SQL in the SQL database, and then will send back the data, and that will send back the page, and that will return back to the web browser and displays the page. So this is how usually when you request a page, a dynamic web page from the browser, and how it access PHP processor to process the PHP statements, and then access the database and they get the results back. Okay, now having said that, let's look at how we can usually work with PHP. Usually when we start with the echo, which is similar to print command. We can have our very first statement as hello world. Remember that every time when you write something in PHP, we should start with the open tag, and then we have to properly close with the close tag. Although there are some alternative syntax where you can use the same open and close tag, which is not recommended. We should stick on to the first one. So once you write this piece of code, then you save it as a PHP file, and then when you access through a web server, let's say Apache, and then that will pre-process, and then you will get the HTML output saying that simply hello world. So since I hope most of you have already done PHP, by the way, can you please raise your hands if you have already done PHP? Prasad and Shifani, have you learned PHP at some point, or is it the first time?
It's first time, sir.
Prasad? Okay. By the way, I mean, like, since there was at least one person who start first time, so I have to stress some points. So I don't think others will not, against it. So in case if this is boring and if you already know what I'm actually discussing, you are free to leave. It's perfectly all right, right? So just to be confirmed, right? So the today's session, I'm going to focus on basic PHP syntax. Now, as I told you, the process we have, start with PHP and ends with close tag. So in between, we can have PHP statements, and then we have to have semicolon. So all the statements usually we ends up with a semicolon, just to be clear. Right now, once you do that, what you need to, as I told you earlier, is you have to save it as a PHP file. But when you call it in the web browser, so previously we discussed the process, and then you will get the results back as a HTML file. So getting the environment that you need, you can do a couple of things. One thing is you can manually install the web server, the required PHP MySQL setup, or you can use one of LAMP or SAM setup you will have. So for example, let me share like the starting point. So in case if you're installing a SAM or LAM, which is actually contains a web browser, which is Apache, and then we will have MySQL. The open source version is known as MariaDB, PHP, and also these are the two things that we need, right? So what you can do is you can just click on download, and then select whatever the package suited for your operating system, and then you can install it, right? So it will take some time to install, but once you get it, right, you can open up. So I think we have done this in our previous MySQL as well, so I'm not going to spend time, but let's look at how we can use this. Right. Now, when you want to have this, right, once you are installed, and then you can save it in the folder where you want to have it. Usually, we can keep the files in the docs folder. We normally call htdocs, and then your project name. then you can save the file. So I'm assuming that you have the setup. Otherwise, you can find some online, setup where you can try. So one place that I usually use where you can try this, for example, PHP. I will put up the coding in case if you want to try it out, the code when I'm actually explaining. So you can go to the line. So I will explain here uh, the link. So I'll put it in the chat. So you can try it out, the commands that I will explain. And I will give you small exercises so that those who have already know PHP can give us some answers. Right. So back to the note. Right. Now, as I told you earlier, you can try in the online environment. So I'm not going to, keep on explaining that part. So you can try that. A couple of things, the syntax wise, you can use single line comments, double slash, multi-line comments. You can have slash and star, like in C, for example, C style syntax. And the variables, remember always the variables start with the dollar mark. And then uh, we have to have the values. For example, when we create variables for string values, we usually use, double quotes. And then we will have, in this particular example, it's a string variable that we are going to create as a username. And then, we assign Fred Smith to the username variable. Right, now let's look at our first program. And what happens here is basically we save the Fred Smith in the username variable and we print it. And then we'll have a break. And then we have another variable and then we print that. So usually it should print Fred Smith twice. So numeric variables are also the same. So in case it's like you can store any value, with the numeric variable. So only difference is if you need to store it as a integer value, you should not put the decimal point. Otherwise, when there's a decimal point, it will take as floats. Now, when you want to create multiple values, for example, with the same name, right? Then we can use array method, where in this example, we are creating a variable called team, that is team array, where we have Bill, Mary, Mike, and Chris and Ann there. And then whenever you want to access team 3, which is you start with 0, 1, 2, and 3, which will display Chris. So note that in PHP, we start with 0. Right. The next one is creating two-dimensional arrays. For example, let's say we are going to keep track of gaming situation. For each row, we create as arrays. So you can see here, this is 3 by 3, where we will have positions created, and then we have crosses and circles. The crosses are, indicate where you have put the cross and the symbols, right? So in this particular case, each row we will have an array method, and then each all the rows put together we put an array. Now, so this will create a 3 by 3 array, which is a set of string values we store. So whenever you want to get, let's say, the third element in the second row, that means this element, third element in the second row. So we have to first, access the second row, which is the index is 1. So this will be 1. And then the third column, which is 0, 1, 2, we have 1 and 2, like this. Whenever you create the variables, there are some the rules you need to follow. In PHP, we will use a $sign, and after the $sign, you have to have the letter or an alphabet, or you can also have a underscore, letter of the alphabet and underscore. And then you can have only the letters, numbers, and underscores. And remember, you cannot have any spaces. And then if you have like more than one word, usually we recommend you to use underscore to separate out. For example, if you want to have username with a space, since space is not allowed, we can use underscore here. And the case names are case sensitive. You have to be very careful. So capitalization matters. So especially this is one of the problems you might face if you are a beginner. And if you use different capitalization, then you might end up getting problems. So let's look at some arithmetic operators. So here we will have addition, subtraction, multiplication, division that you already know. Modulus meaning the remainder, and then we can also have increment, decrement, and exponent. Right. The next is assignment operator. When you talk about assignment operator, and then we can use, for example, assigning value. For example, first one, we assign the value 15 to variable j. And then when you have incremental operator, plus and equal, which is equal to, you get the same value and then you plus 5. So which means you get the existing value and you add 5 to existing variable. So same goes with the subtraction, multiplication, division. And also, like when you get concatenation, this is we normally call concatenation, especially with the strings, we use dot operator. And then finally we'll get the remainder as well. The next set is comparison operators. Right. So we have comparison operators, especially when you have to provide uh, when we want to talk about um, comparison, especially in control structures. We have to talk about selections, repetitions. So we will have usually conditional check. So the operators we will have whenever you want to check whether the value is equal to something. For example, here we will check whether $j is equal to 4. So that you should, if you try this, right? If you say, let's say you say $j equals to 4, and if you say equal $j is equal to 4, then you should get the answer here, right? So what should be the answer? So in this particular case, what normally happens when you check whether is equal to 4, if it is true, we get the value of 1. If it is false, we will get it 0, right? Now, for example, if you check whether this is not equal, echo. So for example, let's say $j is not equal to 0, sorry, 4, right? So you should be getting the answer. We can check whether it's equal to 0 and not equal to 0. So similarly, we can check whether the value is greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to, not equal to. Okay. And last two things is very important. So sometimes when you're comparing two things, if you use equal sign, doesn't check whether it's a string value or an integer value. So for example, you can type something like echo. We can say, let's say whether we can check whether 4 is equal to the string 4 values, and which will say true, right? So you can try that. Can you check that one and see whether you can understand that? So you will see. So it will say true. But if you use 3 equal signs, if you use 3 equal signs, let's say you have 4, you have 3 equal signs, and then you can have a string as 4, you can see what will happen, right? So you will have no output in this particular case because it's false. So you can take either true or false here. Same goes here as well. Then you can have logical operations when you want to combine several statements together. Especially, let's say, comparison operators. You can use AND operator, which will be true if the both expression evaluated true. If it will be right, or if one of these is true, then it will be evaluated true. And then you can have not operator, which is the opposite. Right. So the variable assignments you can see here. So for example, let's say we have X, we assign to 10, and then we will reassign Y to X. And then you can also see that you add 10 to $X as the first example. Second one, we have $Y. So here we can see the X value is increased by 10. You subtract 10 from Y. This is increment and this is decrement, which usually will reduce 1. And then here we will add 1 to it, and then this is subtract 1 to it. Then we have if the selection, basically you first increase X and then you test whether it has the value of 10, right? First you test whether it's 0, then you decrease Y. So I hope basically you have already covered these in your previous sessions. Right. Very important one and very normally used to do this. So what happens is we usually take, let's say, two couple of messages and then you want to concatenate. I already told you the dot operator is concatenation. So for example, here you can see in example, there is a variable called messages equals to 5. And with echo, you will see we are going to print number of messages. So you have dot messages, dot messages. So basically, this should output as you have 5 messages. And then if you want to append one string to another, simply you can use dot operator like this. Right, string types. You can, if you want to preserve exact contents, you can use quotation mark, single quote, right? And if you want to evaluate the as a variable, you will use double quotes. So make a note of this. So simply you can, without using concatenation, you can echo with double quotes. So again, make a note of this. Okay, then escaping characters. For example, when you presenting a string value, and then we can use either single quotes or double quotes. Let's say you are using a single quote, but let's say the content is also you have a single quote like this. So then what happens? The PHP will complain about this, and to correct this, we can use escape, right? So escape can be used whenever you want to escape something, right? Now, in this particular case, to represent this as a single quote within the string, so we use a escape character or slash here. And similarly, if you're using double quotes, and if the string contains double quotes, you will face the same. So you will use escape character there as well. So whenever you want to use tabs, new lines, and then the courage returns, there are special characters you can use it. Now, for example, we have /t/n/r/t, for example, will give you a tab space. /n, usually you will say new line. So if you want to use slash, then maybe you have to use double slash, right? So make a note of this. Then multi-line commands, for example, multi-line string echo commands, you can see here. Author, we have Steve Bellmer, and then we can say developers, and we have something. And finally, we put up, author name. Now, the way is we can actually use multi-line sequence. We will have 3 angle brackets. We normally say here doc or here document. What we can use is we can preserve the values exactly as it is. So for example, we can start by saying echo command and 3 angle brackets and _n. This is a special string that we have used to denote this. And we can end with _n, we can have a semicolon. So there it will preserve all the spacing and line breaks exactly as it is, which is very useful. Okay, then the constant values. So for example, sometimes we have to define some variables, especially when we work with dynamic website. Now, for example, one thing that we want to know is original location of the browser. I mean, the files that we are going to save it as a PHP. So here we are going to define it as a root location. So the define is used to define a constant. And then you have 2 parts. This is the variable that we are going to use, and this is the value. Remember that there's no dollar mark here, right? And basically we say, so that we put it is inside the directory. And then basically we are going to say the root location, which is mapped to this. And this is what we have. By changing that, you can use it for any root location. Right. Okay, now we discuss, couple of PHP statements, right? To check your understanding, what I want you to do is, I want to start with 2 variables, right? And print all the outcomes like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Right? So let's start. I'm going to do the first exercise. I want you to provide me the code. Variables and assign numerical values. Right. Here is the first exercise. Just create two variables assigned to numerical values. I want output of adding the two numbers, subtracting the first number with the second number, multiplication of the two numbers, and the division. Okay, let's start then. So once you write down the commands, you can just put the answers in the chat. So in this simple exercise, what we checked is the use of creating variables, the assignment, as well as the use of operators. Let's get back to the note again. Now, what we were discussing is basically the different operators, and then we discuss the string types as well as escape characters, the constants, right? So let me a brief introduction to the print command that in PHP you can use print. Basically, it's takes as a single parameter, and then you will have a return value. But the echo is usually what is common and commonly used, which is what we call PHP language construct, right? So if you compare echo and print, usually echo is much faster than the print statement. But the problem will be sometimes the echo cannot be used in complex expressions. For example, here, we will check whether it's B. If it is there, then we are going to print true. Otherwise, we are going to print false, because in here we will check whether this is true or false, and based on that, you will take the outcome. Right, let's move on to functions. So in this particular case, you will see creating a function called long date, and you will get the timestamp. Simply that will reformat depend on the format that you want. For example, in this case, we return the date in the long form, where we can list the long format of the date. So whenever you want to use time, let's say today's date, you can call the time function, and simply time function will give you today's date. And if you want to get something, let's say back in this particular example, you will see 17 days ago. So which means you have to put into seconds. 17 days means 24 hours. Hours means 60 minutes, and minutes means 60 seconds. So you see subtracting this will get a date 17 days ago. Right. Then sometimes when we work with the PHP or processing PHP, we use what we call super global variables to get a lot of information. Now, for example, you can have variables called global and server, get and post, which I will discuss, because when it comes to form handling, we discuss about the get and post in detail, where you can actually send and receive using both get and post method. So you can access those variables, the files, the cookies, the session we will discuss, for example, how to create a single session variable. and how do you make use it for keeping the information in a particular session and so on. So these are known as super global variables. Right. Now, uh, when we use super globals and when you use the security aspect, we need to careful. For example, when we use, for example, um, what we want to access in the current page, that we can have underscore server, we can have HTTP referrer. Basically, that will be the URL of page that refer to the use in the current web page. So what we can do is normally the hackers can use, especially when we use get and post methods, you can use other super globals with some malicious code, right? So you can damage. So what you can use is whenever you want to do that, we can use PHP, what we call the HTML entities function, which will contain all the characters into what we call HTML entities, which make sure that there's no malicious codes inside. So whenever you will access those, make sure that you will use HTML entities code. Right, now let's move on to the conditionals. If statements, we start with the if and then you have a condition. Within the curly brackets, you can have, this is very simple if statement. But then if you want to have a else part, then you will have if the condition and then you have curly brackets. Then else in that part, you will have the curly brackets. In case if you want to check multiple if statements, then the command is we can use so when we have multiple statements to be checked, then the best thing would be you can use else if command. So we have if you have a condition, else you have another if. Actually, you can have nested if you want, but this method, when you combine both else and if, it'll be more compact. So make a note of that. Right. And then you can also use switch statement, right? Then use a switch based on particular values. We can use, for example, in this case, we will switch and then we get the dollar page. If the page is home, then we will say that you selected home. Note of the break statements. Similarly, you can try about, the news, the login, and the links, which is basically you are switching the values based on the particular value. More compact operator is what we call the ternary operator, can be used for simple selections. For example, instead of saying if and else, you can use the ternary operator here, which is if the fuel is less than or equal to 1, we can output the fill tank now. Otherwise, we'll output there's enough fuel. So the same thing that we can actually use in another way, we can have a variable and then depend on the values, the condition, we are going to assign true or false. So if the fuel is less than 1, enough is false, otherwise this is true, right? So that is about the conditionals. So let's have a small exercise on conditionals then. The second exercise. exercise 2. Okay, so this time I want you to work on simple if statements, right? Um, right. Let's say create a variable to store each of a person, right? You can have person. Then recommend movie based on the age. The rules are as follows. Okay, so the rules are like this. If age is less than 13, recommend animated. If age is between 13 and 18, recommend teenage movies. If age is between 19 and 60, recommend classical movies. Any other input? Show an error message. So when I say any other movie like negative values, okay. Yeah, can you share me the answers? Right. Just to explain like my answer. For the second one, we got the answer from Sekani Premadas. Good. This is exactly what I expected. So the first of all, in this particular case, I need to define what age is. Let me put my age is like 10. If $age is less than 13, then what I'm going to recommend. Age is 13. So we can say, okay, we can simply say echo. Actually, you can use any recommended animated movies. Yes, okay. Okay, I got the answer from Jayasekar as well for the second one. Good. I forgot the semicolon earlier. So, and then we can have else if I can ask whether $8 is less than 18. Okay, this depends on what you exactly want to do. Actually, you can check, as I told you, whether this is in between. That is perfectly all right. So in my case, in case if I put 18, I will say, okay, I recommend teenage movies. And then we can have right again else if I can ask whether age is less than 60. Can say go recommended classical movies. Else we might say error. Actually, what should be sensible if it is negative, we could check whether the value is less than 0 or whether the age is, I don't know, greater than 120 or so. But this is simply we put in this manner. So in this way, we will get animated movies. But let's just check, let's say 15. So it's a teenage movie. Let's put 20. Make sure that it works for all the values, right? Let's say 50. And let's put 150. Okay, all right, minus 5. So I think that part is you already know. So in this case, so this is uh always recommended animators movie, which means I have to make this clear. So maybe I have to check whether the age is greater than 0 and so that it will work it out. Sorry, I forgot the bracket here. Yeah. Okay, should work.
So that 18 also we have to.
Yeah, so that means we have to put all these, right? So that means we have to check this age is greater than or equal to 13. And right, so that means we have to put the barrier here as well. Otherwise, we might not get the correct answer. Okay, so you see the problem, I think. Now in my case, so I made the ranges so that we'll get the complete answer. Okay, thanks for pointing out that. And then the second one, to explain the second one, we have to ask the switch statement. Now, when we talk about the switch statement, and we are getting the date for this. So let me discuss answer for that one as well. Now, when you're using a switch statement, I hope you have remember that you have to control over the break statement. So let's discuss the second answer. So for example, in this particular case, we have to define what a day is. Let's say it's Monday. And depend on the value of the day. So we have to use switch. And then we have to have the day. And depend on the day, we are going to put up some values, right? So for example, if the case is Monday, right? We know that we have to recommend, okay, echo recommend watching movie at cinema, right? So that's should work, right? Okay, so what was there?
Have to switch, I think. T missing, I think. Switch T.
Okay, yes. Switch, yeah. Yeah, okay. Is missing, yes, recommend watching at the cinema. So same goes here with the Monday as well. Let's say case use day equal, yeah, I can copy paste the same. But we know that you don't have to do this, right? So let me put in this way and let me put this is Tuesday. So what will happen? Right? So case Tuesday, this is okay. But what if you put Monday? Okay, so it repeat twice. You got my point. The point is you have to put a break statement. Instead, what you could do is we can remove this statement. So simply you can list all the case value statements here. So case Wednesday, case Thursday, case Friday. So any of these, and we are recommending the watching the movie at the cinema, right? So the Monday, yes, recommending. Yeah, Wednesday, it will be the same. Friday, it'll be the same, right? Okay, now what about the Saturday and Sunday? So that means after this, we have to say case Saturday. And we are going to recommend, okay, recommend watching movie at home, right? And let's put Saturday, right? We are getting watching at home, right? But what about Friday now? It gives both, right? We have to say break here, right? So otherwise, what will happen? It will go to the next line. So we have break. So we have a break. Now it should work. So both Saturday and Sunday, we are recommending watching movie at home. And finally, if none of this works, right? So we can say, okay, maybe we can say the default is invalid input, whatever. So let's put some garbage values here, right? It says invalid input. So you got the point that how you may actually use this. Right. So that's about the two exercises. We have come up to the selections. Let's now switch to the remaining parts. Okay. So we discussed the selections. Next, let's look at loops. We can use a while loop. We know when you're using a while loop, we have to have a start value, the increment, and also the condition. And then in this particular case, you will see count times 12. That means basically if the count is 1, we say 1 times 12 is 12. 2 times 12 is 24. So that is actually multiplication table for 12. Right? Okay. Yeah, Prasad, the answer that is okay, Prasad, but I think you can save echo statement by combining all these together. I hope you have understood in the example. Right.
Doctor,
Yes.
Dr. Small question, what is the best thing that that switch statement or the if that mean we can check the date with the if condition is the date all the date we have to add as a if condition, and after that inside of the switching the if it that through the Sunday or Monday we can print out the code that one. So is that good or bad practice or something, that combination?
You put me in a trouble. I think the best answer should actually depends on, we have to ask a practitioner who actually use this. But I think remember the both statement we can use for multiple choices or multiple conditions, that for sure.
Yeah.
And when the conditions are very, very complex, then I think better to use if, like you have multiple statements are checking, with two conditions you have to check. That is not possible with switch statement. Switch statement simply you check with possible set of values. But I think if you have multiple conditions you have to check, then you have to go for if. So simply you can say if the conditions are very complex, then you can go for if statements, right?
Okay.
But when you have switch, it's direct, right?
Yeah.
You check single variable. In a complex situation, you can compare multiple values. But let's say if you have in our case, it's just the day that we are comparing.
Yeah, that one that we case by case that we are checking 5 days, I think,
Yeah.
for the day. But if we can add in the if that before the if we check 5 days, that's I just thought what is that for
Yeah. I understand your point. So whenever situation like this, maybe the best would be the switch. But then when you have a very complex situations, like in this particular case, you are comparing multiple values, but it's not what I mean. If you have like multiple variables that you have to combine with, let's say, comparison operators, then you have to go with the if statement. And I think the switch is more clear, like,
Yeah.
compared to if statement,
One
yeah, you can see now in our example, we have case Monday, case Tuesday, and finally, so it's more clearer if you try to do this with the if, it's more clearer.
Yeah.
And the other one is the default case. Now we are checking everything, and except if it does not follow any of those values, we have to go for the default case. So I think in that way, the switch is better. But when you have like very complex condition, as I mentioned, when you have to compare like multiple variables, multiple conditions, then you should, go with that. And sometimes when you want to check for ranges, like in our first one, try to implement the first one as well. So sometimes you might feel that if might be better than switch, right? So it depends on, usage.
Thank you, Doctor.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for asking the question, because that will lead the others to think about which one to use. Like there are always, but I think we should pose this question to a who actually practically use this, right? Anyways, so we were discussing the loops. So first one is a while loop where we have starting value and increment and then the condition. But the for loops, it's in the fashion of like a C structure, where we will have starting value and the condition, then we have the increment. So simple structure you have for loops as well. Okay, that is about the loops. We can discuss some examples later on. But then let's move on to look at the function and the objectives. The functions, you already know that will make a clear code. We can put several statements together so that we can use the function again and again. So the advantages are listed, like you have less typing, reduce syntax, decreasing loading time, decrease execution time, and so on. And then you have objects as well, right? So when you use objects with these one or more functions and the data they use, it basically we can create using the classes, which again you can have a set of methods as well as the data. You can put everything in a one single place. Just to look at how to create functions in a PHP, you can use function keyword and function name, and then you can have set of parameters. And within this, you can have set of statements. And remember that usually these function names are case insensitive. Remember, we discussed the case sensitive earlier, but the functions usually we say they are case insensitive. Then when you're creating functions, the return value is very important, because you can create function without returning any values. But especially when you're actually doing operations or calculations, it's always better that you can actually use a return value. Right? So in this particular example, you see you will fix the name to a single case, uppercase, with the first letter. And then how do you do that? But first you convert the string into a lowercase, which is one way that you handle the string values. You could try this. So another thing is like, how do you returning an array? Because the fixing, you can see there are three in this particular case. Fixing name William Henry Gates, and then we have mixed cases here, and we are separately printing these values, and then we can put everything together again, n1, n2, n3, because you work on separately, put into an array, and then you can return, right? So the returning value contains the three parts, the three names parts. Again, very useful, especially when you want to call a function, get the answer, because it contains multiple values. So best possible way to return a value is putting it into a array method. The passing the values to a function by reference, and in this particular example also you can see the same three names are there, but in this time we will use it as three variables, A1, A2, and A3. And simply first you print the names as it is, you fix the numbers, then you print again. So the function will fixed using N1, N2, N3, and you will see here what happens. Basically, you get the variable and then you assign to the same variable, you work on the same. So what happens here, it will originally values will be changed, and depend on what you have saved there, then you will change the original values. But then again, when we want to fix the values, and then when you want to refer the values that we have defined in early, you have to make them global variables. Now, one thing we should know about in general, whatever the variables that we create within the variable will be local to that variable. So in previous case, we have used separate variable names, but let's say we won't use the same variable names. A1, A2, A3. In that particular case, make sure you define A1, A2, A3 as global variables. So to define your variables as global, we use a global keyword. So you can see here, within the function fixed names, we define the three variables, A1, A2, and A3 global, so that now you can access the values the outside. Otherwise, although if you use the same names, whatever you have the outside and inside, they treat it as different values. Right. I think up to this point, we'll finish for today. Just to summarize what we have done in today's session, we actually covered the basics of PHP, the dynamic programming language that you can use to manipulate the values. And we discussed the basic syntax, and we discussed up to global variables. So next week, I'm going to cover the rest of the material, and then we can talk about implementation of the details. Right. Thank you, everyone. Let's hope to meet you next week.
Thank you very much, Dr.